Okay, how about that? Better? Right. Okay. I don't see any new faces out there, but we are studying the parables this quarter. Tonight we're going to be studying the parable of the tower and the king preparing for war. But first we'll start with a prayer. Dear Father in heaven, tonight be with us and help us to understand the cost of discipleship. And help us to admit to ourselves and to realize that that cost or the sacrifice we have to make is very hard, but we must do it. And help us to put your Son first in all things. In his name, amen. Right, so we are studying parables. A parable being a comparison between two unlike things to demonstrate a point or a lesson. Some of the parables that we've already talked about. Am I echoing too much or what? No, I'm fine. Okay. Some of the things we've talked about are like a tiny mustard seed, when planted, grows into a huge tree. And that corresponds with the church. The church started out very small in Jerusalem and then grew over the world. Another parable we talked about was a farmer planting a seed in a field, and there is various results when he throws out his seed. Well, the gospel is the same way of those who hear. But tonight we're going to be looking at two parables in the book of Luke, showing the cost of being a disciple of Jesus. Everything has a cost, and Jesus is trying to get that across to his followers. Kind of busy up there, but we're going to read, and this is what all of our verses are from this passage tonight, Luke 14, verse 25 through 33. We're going to read the whole bulk of it, and then we'll be chopping it up. Verse 25. Now great crowds accompanied him being Jesus, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate where he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any of you that does not renounce all he has cannot be my disciple. Okay, there's just 8 verses here. But there's really 2 major lessons here. The first 3 verses are almost a lesson to themselves, and then they're followed by the parables that we're going to look at tonight of the cost of discipleship. If I had to condense this theme down to one pithy saying, I would think it's Jesus is telling folks to look before you leap. Look before you leap. And the rest of this lesson is expanding on that thought. Jesus is trying to get across to his followers that discipleship is very serious and it's a dedicated life. Becoming a disciple is not something that you blithely decide to do one day. It should be well thought out, and that's why he's providing these 2 examples. Okay, the circumstances. Where, when, and why did he tell these parables? Sometimes I'm going to ask open-ended questions, and you can just yell it out as long as it's 1 or 2 words. But how long was Jesus' ministry? How many years? 3 years, right. So this is towards the end of Jesus' ministry. He is heading down south through the area of Perea, which is the modern-day country of Jordan. He's heading towards Jerusalem. Now, when he goes to Jerusalem, he knows what's going to happen to him. He will be crucified. So that's on his mind. Nobody else knows that. So let's look. Verse 25. Great crowds accompanied him. These crowds, what was the composition of these crowds? What were they made up of? What ethnic sort of people? They were Jews, right. He mainly taught to the Jews. His ministry was to the Jews. So these Jews are all following him around. But why are great crowds following Jesus? Now, out of all of these people, there was a lot of different agendas, a lot of different wants and wishes of people that were following after him. He had fed thousands of people with a few fish and loaves. Some people probably wanted another free meal. Jesus had also healed people. Some people probably wanted to be healed. Other people came to watch the healing. It was an entertainment value, a spectacle for them. Other people had heard him claim to be the Messiah and the Son of God. They wanted to know more about Jesus. This had been promised to the children of Israel since the time of Abraham. Was he the man? They were hungry for more information. Jesus was a lot different than their other pompous leaders, the Sadducees, the Pharisees. He put them in their place when he had discussions with them. Jesus was a common man, just like these multitudes that were following him, but he spoke with knowledge and authority. And finally, other people probably could care less about the spiritual side. They wanted to know, is he the guy that's going to lead a revolution and kick the Romans out and establish home rule again for Israel? Regardless, these crowds have got to wear you down with their constant closeness and scrutiny and demands. If you realize today, we have actors and sports stars and musicians, they're all followed by crowds. But they have a way of escaping the crowds. They can get away from people, go up to their fancy hotels, lock the door. Jesus did not have a way of getting away unless he went to a mountain or to a lake to be by himself. Jesus said he had nowhere to lay his head. He didn't own any property. So Jesus is probably pretty weary here. And does anybody remember Dwayne's talk Sunday morning? When Jesus saw the crowds, he was moved with what? What word? Compassion. Okay, compassion is not mentioned in this section that we just read. Jesus' temperament seems to be a wee bit edgier, the way he's feeling. He made some very difficult, ear-catching statements in his ministry. Okay, imagine if you can wipe your brains, like these multitudes had heard. Love your enemies. Sell your possessions. Give them to the poor. You must be born again. And how about this one? One of his most disturbing statements was, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. What do you think the people's reaction would be to that? Like, is this man crazy? Well, the Bible tells us the reaction that the disciples heard it and they said, this is a very hard saying. Who can listen to it? And they turned away from him. Well, Jesus drops a hard saying here that makes the multitude's head explode. In verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, even his own life, he can't be my disciple. Okay, what does Jesus mean here? I'm supposed to love my enemies, but I'm supposed to hate my family. Good things about the job at their hospital. But Jesus is kind of like a job recruiter himself here, isn't he? He's trying to get his followers. But he's telling them, if you want to follow me, you got to hate your family. You got to deny yourself. He's not keeping back the difficult and dangerous things in order to enlist people to his cause. Jesus doesn't want anybody following him with the false illusions. Hating here. What is Jesus really demanding? Jesus isn't being literal that you got to hate your family. Like I said before, he taught us that we should love our enemies, we should honor our parents. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, we're supposed to love strangers. So, first question here. Question 1, why does Jesus require greater loyalty to him than one's own family as a requirement to be his disciple? Megan? Hey, Brock. Dave's got a question too. Why does Jesus require greater loyalty to him than one's own family?
I mean, to show your level of commitment. I mean, we would expect no less from our own spouse. And this is an even greater relationship than that. So it's like, how committed are you going to be?
Right. And you as a mother, you've got like 3 kids, right?
What?
How could you put them aside and then put Jesus in front of them?
Well, I mean, I feel like kind of 1 and 2 go together a little bit, but.
Correct.
So I feel like, now Google helped me out with this word because I'm not this smart, but it's hyperbole, right? It's an exaggeration.
Correct.
To like make a strong point.
He got their attention. Dave.
Yeah, Jesus is looking at this from an eternal perspective. And he's also understands that this is going to be a question or a challenge some of these Christians are going to face. They're going to have to choose him over their family members. And that's not going to be an easy decision to make, but in the scope of eternity, it becomes a lot easier.
Correct. In families back then, I guess everybody has a tight-knit family. Maybe some do, some don't. But the Jewish families, when I was reading, were very tight-knit. They're large families, and for them to deny them and then to follow Jesus would be very hard. Next question. Oh, Dave, go ahead. Brock. Come on, Brock. Come on down.
A family can lead you away from Jesus.
That's true. That's too a distraction. Right. And we're going to get more into that later. The second question we got here, what does it mean to hate your own life? That's another requirement that Jesus told us. As a job recruiter, for his disciples, you got to hate your own life. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, I think it just means that you're willing to give it up. Not necessarily, you don't like despise your life. We're taught to be grateful, that the Lord has given us life and all of that, but being willing to give it up and not put anything above Jesus.
Right. Anything that's going to get in your way between you and Jesus, whether it's your life, what your passions, your ideals are, or your family, he's saying that has to come secondary.
I got one here.
What?
So a lot of the teachings that he's talking about is about what the kingdom's going to be. And the kingdom is going to look very, very different than what the Jews have expected what the kingdom is going to look like. So to hate your own life, in all these stories and all these parables, there's a lot of service added to talk too. So putting yourself second into these positions, putting yourself second in your family, putting your time in your own life to serve him. So there's a service element between the new kingdom that he's trying to understand and trying to show here.
Okay. Let's keep moving on here because I think I might. Oh, go ahead, Herb.
Tim and I think grew up with this same definition. But Tim, didn't you hear that hate meant love less than? The word hate here in verse 26 and by application the family and your own life, that it was love less than. You never heard that? Did anybody else hear that? Is that just me? Okay.
Okay.
Right. Yes, by comparison. Love your family less than Jesus, in other words, which is what, I think it was Daniel or whoever back here, Ryan, that said that by comparison. But I thought I heard many times that it meant to love less.
Right.
Love Christ more, love God more.
Right.
Than your family, than yourself. That's what I.
And Jesus says in verse 26, if you're not willing to do this, you cannot be my disciple. Wow, that's a very hard statement there. There's no maybes, there's no modifications, no exceptions. You cannot be my disciple. Jesus says another difficult thing in his job description for being a disciple. In verse 27, what? Oh.
I was going to go ahead and finish.
Okay, in verse 27, he says, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Okay, words change over time. Today, the cross is part of our culture. When we see the cross, is it a negative connotation to us? No. I mean, she has a cross around her neck right now. For example, the cross, we see it all the time. In jewelry, like this was $350 silver cross that I saw on the internet. Graveyards, they put crosses on the graves. This is the German cemetery at Normandy. The Germans all have black markers and the Allies all have white markers. The cross is used in architecture. This is the cathedral in Florence. The floor plan is in the shape of a cross. But in the time of Jesus, people would be horrified when they heard, bear your own cross, because this is what stuck in their head of what a cross is. The cross was a symbol of crucifixion for punishment of slaves and rebels and criminals. And yet that was turned into the symbol of Christ. But it was a symbol of shame and humiliation. Can you imagine Mary, Martha, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, wearing crosses around their neck after they saw what happened to Jesus? Or would Christians bury their loved ones that had been martyred and put crosses over them? So when Jesus is referring to the cross, he's not being literal but figurative about this. But he needed the imagery of the horror of that to jolt their heads, that whoever does not bear his own cross cannot be my disciple. This isn't the first time Jesus talked about carrying the cross. He mentioned it also in Matthew and in Luke, when he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So, what is cross bearing? And are the crosses that people carry today any different than the first century? Oh, you don't have a mic. Oh, Scott's got a mic. Just yell it out. Bowie, Megan. Scott, did you have a comment? Mayhem. Okay.
So maybe this might be oversimplifying it, which is not my intention, but it brings to my mind a more modern saying that we have today, taking one for the team. Like, you may have to accept some hardship or something negative happening to you for the greater good that you're trying to, no?
I'm trying to feed what you guys think. Somebody else, what do you think?
I'm looking at this in the last question, I guess, a little more literally. As far as hating your life, I mean, if you're living a life of sin, you should be hating your life. That should be something that they were disgusted by. We should all be disgusted by the sin in our lives and want to get rid of that. And looking at that same segue, we deserve death. And Christ is saying, you know, you kind of got to face a little bit of what you deserve here and carry that cross and know that, you know, this is what the life you're leaving and getting something better. But there is a cross to bear in that change. And then even more literally, he's talking to people who are going to end up on actual crosses if they follow Jesus. That is a very real consequence for them, living in a time when Christianity is illegal. So he's saying, you know, don't come into this blind. Yes, heaven is awaiting, but you're going to have to go through some really serious stuff. And today, I don't think we face anything remotely close to that. But we should still have the same mentality that sin is disgusting. We should hate that life. We should love what Christ is offering and be willing to go wherever we need to go to get to heaven someday.
Okay. Scott, finally.
Yeah, Mike, the previous question, but it still relates. I'm sure back in those days, family was everything. Today we have, you know, maybe not as strong family unit as that generation. Change for these individuals that are following Jesus, you know, they're taking a leap forward, their faith in him, and having to turn their back somewhat on their family. And by the same token, the changes that they need to make might be changes that their family, are dead set against. And so I think from the previous question that, hating is just wanting them to change and see the light, so to speak. It's difficult for those that follow him right now. Tell them if you can't, you can't change, don't follow me. Same thing with their family. They need to make change. Change was everything.
Okay, Tim?
Just to add to the conversation, it's more like low-hanging fruit. It was something, the idea of bearing a cross, it was something that Jesus did willingly. That was unpleasant, but he did it anyways. And for us today, I think that you're going to make some decisions to do some things for Christ that are not always going to be the best thing that, as far as it feels, but it's something that you're going to do anyway because there's something else to it at the end and there's a reward. So that's just part of the conversation of cross-bearing today versus then.
Yeah, like I said, words change over time, phrases change over the time. Like, oh, that's my cross to carry. Well, my 18-year-old Miata's air conditioner doesn't work. And the 10-minute drive I go home, I suffer because it's so hot in the car. That's not a cross that you're carrying. What Jesus is getting at is something a lot more deeper and more profound. It's a willingness to die to yourself. Carrying the cross was a prelude to execution. Prelude for his execution. And like somebody mentioned, some of these people listening would be executed later in the same manner. But he's using this imagery to show that we've got to give up our desires, our plans, and maybe even our lives if necessary. Paul said, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So Paul is kind of echoing what happens after you carry your cross. You've been figuratively crucified. You're dead. You're now supposed to live the life of Christ. The cross shows complete surrender. That's what Jesus is trying to get across to the multitudes following him. Bonus question. Does anybody know when the cross turned from a symbol of shame to a symbol of Jesus? How was that transformation made? Well, it was in 312, the Emperor Constantine saw a cross over a bridge in a battle. He accepted God, became a Christian, and then turned the cross into the symbol of Christ. So from that time on, from 312 on, the cross was not shameful, but it was something associated with Jesus. Okay, we have finally time to get to our parables. The parable of the tower builder. Luke 14:28. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who begin to mock him, saying, this is a man who began to build and was not able to finish. When you hear the word tower, what pops into your head?
The Majesty Building.
Dude, save it. Okay, anybody else? No. Okay, no, you're all wrong. What I think of is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. There's a tower. Or I think of the Eiffel Tower. Okay, we take goofy shots on vacation. But most likely, the tower he was talking about was a tower in the vineyard. There was a parable. It's called the parable of the tenants. It's recorded in 3 of the Gospels. A man goes out, he plants a vineyard, he puts a fence around it, and he builds a tower. He rents it out and a bunch of unfortunate events follow. But a tower was provided or supposed to be a vantage point for guarding a vineyard and overseeing the workers. It's a 2-story structure. You see the bottom story there. Inside, they could store crops, or the people could live there maybe when they were harvesting the fields. On top was an observatory, so you could look out, watch the workers, or maybe watch for some enemies coming. There's about 1,000 of these left in Israel today. What was the result when the man couldn't finish his tower? What happened? He was mocked. He was mocked, right, okay. So look at this slide here. This is a foundation, and ignore the watermarks. I took it off the internet. Foundation of an old building. But here's a foundation. What could someone use this for? This guy is trying to build a tower. He lays down these stones. He can't use it for anything. He can't use it for crops. He can't use it for observation. People can't live in it. So it's completely useless. And when you think about what was Jesus' occupation? What was his career before he became a minister? He was a carpenter, right. So do you think as a carpenter, he had people that would come to him, start jobs, and not be able to finish paying for them? So perhaps this parable may be based in something like that. But the builder here is an example of a man that did not think before he leaped. And Tim has already ruined my surprise. The eyesore on I-4. It was started in the year 2001. It's still under construction. All they finished is the parking garage and the exterior after 24 years. And what is the result of this? Lots of mocking memes. You can see the things, how they're making fun of the tower here. But everybody in Orlando knows about this tower, and everybody laughs and makes snarky comments because the guy didn't finish. So that's excellent example of this parable here. Moving on, what might building a tower represent in our spiritual lives, and why is it important to count the cost before you begin? Mary. Mary and Phil. Phil first. Hit it.
Jesus refers to this in the Sermon on the Mount when he talks to disciples. That there's only two foundations you can lay, the one that you own and the one that's based on him. So building a tower, the reason it's important is if you don't know why you're building or who you're building for, you're probably not going to finish it. You're probably not going to, it's not going to mean much to you. So it's important to count the cost because everything has a cost, an actual material cost and a time cost. And if it's a foundation built on an earthly pursuit, then the earthly rewards end here, or the earthly demise ends here.
Right.
But if it's a spiritual one built on the rock, which is Christ, has an eternal foundation, even though you build it here, it prepares you for eternity.
Okay. Mary?
Yeah, I said it in a little different way. And the foundation of Christ, of course, is building our lives in such a way that we don't burn out or leave ourselves open to temptation. Because, you know, if you plunge in and you're gonna be a Christian and you're kind of going in all different directions and you know, then you burn out and then you hurt other people. Anyone who's been here any length of time has seen people come into this church and then fall away. So it's important for that reason too, for the effect on others and the effect on ourselves when we fail like that. It's like you said, a foundation alone is useless.
And that's what I put. The psychological impact of failing could be very discouraging. Of course, sometimes failing is good for us because it makes us stronger, right? So let's keep going here. The next parable is the parable of the king going to war. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. Jesus' parable is telling us that no wise king is going to run into battle with 2-to-1 odds against him without first considering whether he would be victorious or he's going to lose. His chances in battle should be weighed very seriously. This is a life or death situation. It's not like building a tower. People are going to die. Are there cases where outnumbered kings or individuals have beaten their opponents? Okay, think of the Bible. I mean, there's exceptions to everything. But think in the Bible, what kings or men have won against overwhelming odds? David, Gideon, Hezekiah, Moses. I mean, the Bible, Old Testament is filled with examples of people that fought insurmountable odds, but God was on their side. In life, that seldom happens. When you're outnumbered 2-1, you're probably going to lose. So the king sits down and he ponders his situation, the analysis of the pros or cons. That's what Jesus is trying to get across to his followers, to think about what you're going to do. Think about the cost of discipleship. The king would think, if he's going to be defeated, then he should maybe send an ambassador out and sue for peace. Defeat would be a horrible price to pay. What would happen if the king lost? He'd lose his army. He'd lose his kingdom. His family is taken away and becoming slaves. And he himself could lose his life. So in any case, the king is going to analyze the situation. And that's the point, analysis. Something that the other example in the parable did not have. The guy just jumped into it. This person thought before he leaps. Okay, I kind of wish I wouldn't have had this question now that I've thought about it, because this question is a lot like the prior question, but I'll see what you guys think. What does going to war represent in our spiritual lives, and why is it better to make peace than fight a losing battle?
So I think that that when well, I lost my train of thought because of the rain.
Go ahead while he's regrouping.
Well, like Mary said, this affects other people. So both the tower, you have people mocking you because you didn't complete it. And God doesn't want Christianity mocked. And in this case, it's life or death. You're leading other people astray. So if you proclaim to be a Christian and then you fail at that, and other people are following you, you are now leading them off into a dangerous path. And maybe they don't realize, hey, this isn't real Christianity, and now you're causing people to stumble and in fact lose their lives.
Okay. I had what does deliberating or considering mean for us? Well, we should access our own resources, our own talents, our own strengths. And before we jump into something in the kingdom, we should maybe think about, well, am I the best person to be this teacher? Or maybe I'm not really qualified to be an elder if someone asks me. We should access that and then make the wise choice here. And then on the secular side, if you're going to start a business, you're going to enter marriage, if you're going to buy a car, you should always sit down and think of it over before you make a decision. Go ahead.
Okay, so the point that I was going to make is we don't want to go into a fight unless we know we can win. And I think an angle on this is with temptation. You don't want to put yourself into a situation of temptation that you may not be able to overcome. You always want to put yourself in a situation where you can succeed. So, for example, if you're somebody who's had a drinking problem, you don't want to go into bars to hang out with friends because that's a temptation that you're likely to give into. So, I think that's the way you're making peace rather than to going into battle. So, a temptation that you know you can overcome. I'm not going to be tempted by this. Then you can be in a situation. You may not need to hide from that situation.
Right.
But
right.
A situation that could be a temptation, that could lead you to sin. The comparison there is negotiating for peace by saying, I'm gonna totally stay away from that. I'm not even gonna try to fight that battle.
Right. Right. Phil?
Yeah, I think Paul really displays this idea in Romans 7 about himself when he talks about trying to deal with sin without getting any help, trying to deal with it on his own. And I think that's what happens with a lot of Christians. They get baptized, they They learn a little bit from the word, and then they go out and try to fight their own battle, not realizing that they can't do it alone. They need Christ. Paul recognized that at the end of chapter 7. He says, "So wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of sin and death? But thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord, who gives us the victory." Spiritual warfare takes place because of sin and because of Satan. But for us, the only way we can win is if Christ is with us when we fight sin. We can't do it alone.
Okay. The two parables offer us a contrast. The tower builder shows us the consequences of not counting the cost. You could compare him to the Jews. They left Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea when Moses made the water split, but they couldn't get to the promised land. So they're like the builder. They started, they couldn't finish. On the other hand, the king shows us somebody who counted the cost and properly weighed the advantages and disadvantages of war. Okay, we've got like 3 minutes left. Back to my job recruiter analogy. Jesus isn't trying to discourage followers, but he's trying to ensure that those who do follow him understand the depth of the commitment that's required. Jesus wants genuine disciples. He doesn't want fair weather fans, like the children of Israel who could cross the Red Sea but couldn't get to the promised land. True discipleship involves counting the cost and moving forward and being willing to give up everything for him. So he concludes this one section by saying, "So therefore, any one of you that does not renounce all he has cannot be my disciple." That's the last one of his job requirements here. There is a price to be paid in being a disciple. All he has. Do you think this is harder for us today than it was for the people in the first century, since we have more stuff than they did back then? Do you think it's harder for us than it was for them? I don't think it was. I think people are people, no matter where you are. It's going to be tough to put things aside and to put Christ first. And Paul said, "I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I've suffered the loss of all things and count them rubbish that I may gain Christ." So Paul is echoing this whole sentiment here that Jesus is trying to get across these people. You have to put everything away and you have to put me first. Have you guys seen the signs? I think I saw somewhere going to Georgia where it has up there, all you have to do is say this prayer. Jesus, whatever, fill in the blank. I trust you. You are my Savior. That is so opposite to what we hear here in tonight's lesson. There's a lot more involved in being a disciple than just saying a short phrase and then that's good, you're done. That is so not what being a disciple is like. Well, let's get to this last question. When you become a Christian, can you really know all the things you're going to face the rest of your life? And how do you handle the uncertainty? And you have 30 seconds. Run, John, run.
Well, in my experience of some 40 years or more, you can't know everything you're going to face, but you can be building a prayer life, you can be coming to worship and having those things in your life and learning along the way that God will be there for you, but you need to do this consistently, and then you'll be okay. I mean, I've faced challenges I never thought I would face and come through them.
It's day by day. You just
Right.
take it day by day and with trust. Okay, thank you.